We're talking today with Jane Breidenfield of Grand Rapids, Michigan, and the interviewer is Jane Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Okay, Jane, can you start us off with some background on yourself? Where and when were you born?
Where was I born?
Yeah.
In Grand Rapids, Michigan.
Okay, and what year?
8/23/21.
There we go. You're not the oldest person I've talked to by any means.
Right.
Okay. Now, did you grow up in Grand Rapids?
Yes, I did.
Okay. And what did your family do for a living when you were growing up?
My father was a carpenter.
Okay. And how much work did he have during the 30s?
My dad, at sometimes he extended himself, and he signed up to do things, but he found that that wasn't always the greatest. He went to work for one of the companies making cabinets. A lot of the cabinets were made for ice cream stores. My father was a great one and loved milkshakes. Anyway, everything sort of fell apart like it did for all the people his age. And so he had to start working for the WPA for a while. But in all, he was a very successful carpenter.
Okay. And by the late 1930s, were things getting better for him, or did it stay bad until the war?
He actually became president of his carpenters union.
Okay.
And through that, he did gain more work. It was something that Dad always did. He was not a person to lay around and not do anything.
Right.
He would always manage to find something. Right. With my two brothers. The three worked together, building houses mostly.
Okay. All right. Now, where did you go to school?
I went to Union High School and put in a few years at that time called junior college.
Okay. Now, when did you graduate from high school?
I think in 1939.
Okay. And then when you went to college after that, did you go full-time or part-time?
Well, basically, it wasn't a full-time. I picked up just programs that I wanted to participate in. And shortly after that, I found full-time work. And then somehow I learned about the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps, and I enlisted in the WAAC.
Okay. Now we'll back up a little bit. What kind of job did you have before you enlisted?
Well, I worked in a dairy store. I was the person who made all the sandwiches and everything. And basically, that was about it, because I had started working there before I even finished high school, and so I continued on and became one of the managers of one of the stores, and that was basically about what I did.
Okay. And were you living on your own or still with your family?
I lived with my family.
Okay. All right. Now, in the period there, kind of 1939, 40, 41, before Pearl Harbor, were you paying much attention to what was going on in the world?
It must have been a very conscious attention, because I can remember walking down the street and looking and seeing where you could sign up to go into the service, and I walked in the door and signed up.
Okay. But you signed up after the war started.
Yes.
Because I was asking before Pearl Harbor.
I think it was after Pearl Harbor.
Oh, you did. Oh, that's when you enlisted, yeah.
Right. Now, my brother was already in service too, and there was a lot of correspondence back and forth, which made me very conscious of the fact that people were needed.
Okay. I guess what I was asking about was how much you were aware of world events before Pearl Harbor.
To a great extent, a lot of this came through my dad. My dad was very conscious of those things, and it was conversation in the family. And of course, when my brother was in service, it became stronger. We were aware that he was there and what could happen. And so, yes, I was aware.
Okay. And then how did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
gosh, I don't think I can really remember how
Okay.
I learned about Pen Harbor. I just, all of a sudden, it wasn't there, and then it was there.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it was kind of a shock, because my brother was there.
Mm-hmm.
And we didn't know if he was exactly at that island or where he was, you know.
Yeah.
And
Well,
so
yeah.
you were a care, but it was one of those things that you kind of pushed out of your mind. You're too scared to find out about it.
Yeah. Was he in the Army or the Navy?
He was in the Army.
Okay. But the Army barracks got attacked too, so.
Yeah, yes.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And then basically you went on for a while and you kept working, but then at a certain point in 43, you decided it was time to enlist.
Yes.
Okay. So how did you go about that? What was the process for enlisting?
For enlisting,
Yeah.
as I explained to you, I was conscious of it.
Yeah.
I happened to walk by, I don't know what you call it.
Recruiting
The place
office.
where you sign
Yeah,
up.
Right. Okay.
And I walked in and I talked to them and found out what the deal was and signed up.
Okay.
You know, there was nothing that really kept me here,
Mm-hmm.
other than my family, but I was the last of the kits, and
Okay. All right. Now,
so I went.
now, when you enlisted, could you request certain kinds of training, or were you going to go where they sent you?
Basically, I sort of went where they needed the women.
Mm-hmm.
Because I at that time was never asked any section that I wanted to be with. It was a matter of you're there, and later on we're going to put you where we need you.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right. Now, do you remember when you reported for basic training?
I think it was in June.
I think you.
The year I was
43.
21 years old. You had to be 21 back then. And that's when it was.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
I took the train from Grand Rapids to Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and from there to, I forgot. It's one of those things I don't remember.
All right. Well, did you train? Did you go one place to process first and then for training, or?
No, we went straight to where we were training.
Okay.
Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia.
There you go.
There I go. Yes. And we were sitting in the old Army barracks, the real old buildings, and that's where we were.
Okay. How long did it take to get down there from Chicago?
It wasn't an overnight trip.
Okay, but then you did better than some people did, because
Oh, really?
sometimes the trains had to wait for munitions or something, and they'd sit around.
No, I remember that there was 3 or 4 cars of guys going in the Navy,
Mm-hmm.
and 3 or 4 guys of rooms, women.
Yeah. Okay. Now, did the Navy guys come into your cars?
Not really. I
Okay.
think I can remember having to go through theirs.
Okay.
Lots of cute guys, you know, really. But I think we had to go through them to get a meal.
Right. Okay. Now, you said you got to Fort Oglethorpe, and you had very old barracks. And what kind of reception did you get? What happens when you arrive there?
Well, it's like so many things. You're in a room. They're telling you what you're gonna get, what's gonna happen to you. You get your uniforms, all of that sort of thing, and you're shown where you're gonna sleep. That's about it.
Okay.
That's kind of hard to remember that well.
Well, sure. Yeah. Okay. Now, what did the training actually consist of? What were they teaching you?
We had classes we had to go to. We had to get shots like you wouldn't believe. You walk down the street this way and you got one in it, you know. And most of the time, you worked and learned in different areas things that were going to happen and where you might possibly end up and what you could do and what you couldn't do because they had prisoners of war at that base. And basically that was it.
Okay. Now, how much emphasis was there on discipline and following orders?
A lot of it.
Okay. And how would they teach you that?
Well, it was nothing more than explaining to you what you could do and what you couldn't do. If you were on the sidewalk, because a lot of the prisoners of war worked on the grounds and things, and we were told we were never to go between the officer and the prisoners, and we were never to speak to them and that sort of thing. It's a matter of self-preservation.
Okay. All right. Now, a lot of the men, when they went in the service, they got a lot of spit and polish stuff, you know, keep the uniform and everything shiny and pressed and all of that. Did you get that kind of thing? Did you have to make your uniform look a certain way?
I think this was accepted. You know, you were told how you could wear your clothes, what clothes you couldn't wear, where you could sleep. That you slept upstairs and you went downstairs to eat. You went downstairs to the basement to take a shower, and you were given all the instructions as to how you were going to live there.
Okay. Now, and how easy was it for you to adjust to that?
I don't think it was so easy to adjust. It was easy to adjust to. It was like when you went to school. You know, you do this and you don't do that, and you followed orders. That was it.
Okay. Now, do you remember if there were any women in your training class who didn't like to follow orders? I mean, did some of them try to beat the system or break the rules?
Not in the training class.
Okay.
I found that later where I was stationed.
Okay. And about how long did the training last?
I think it was 6 weeks.
Okay.
But then they had to, we had to go into a bivouac area until they found what base they were going to send us to. And we stayed in the bivouac area for possibly a week.
Okay.
And then we were shipped to the station where we were going to be stationed.
Okay.
And
so where did they send you?
Fort Oglethorpe, Georgia.
So you stayed in Fort Oglethorpe. So you stayed there after training?
Pardon?
Did you stay there after training?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Again, it was a matter of just waiting till they assigned you where you were going to be.
Right. But would some of the women go to other bases? Or did you all stay at Fort Oglethorpe?
No, a lot of them were sent to different ones. I was sent to Orlando because at that time they were changing over to the Army. We are no longer going to be an auxiliary. And after I got there, that's when we had to re-up. You could get out if you wanted to, but a lot of the women that I was with did choose to stay.
Okay. Now, for a lot of people today, we won't really understand how that worked. What was the difference between the Auxiliary Corps and just the regular Women's Army Corps?
Where you were assigned. You know, the auxiliary, I didn't really feel that I had a job. When I got to Orlando, I had a job, a daily thing, and that was it.
Okay. Okay, so now you're there, and what job did you have at Orlando?
In Orlando, that's when I became a plotter.
Okay.
And later on was assigned to being a teletype operator.
Okay. Now, can you explain what pause here.
Okay.
Okay, so I would ask you, what does a plotter do?
Actually, it had a raid stand. It told the flight, how many miles, I don't know. There were 3 things that we had put on a flight stand. And the flight stand was you followed the track of the mission overseas. Sometimes there were things that went wrong overseas, and the only way they could figure out what went wrong is for us to plot that mission on this large board of the area that they were flying over. And this was, they brought in from services, all the services officers, and they were up in a balcony and could watch the whole procedure. And that's the way they could figure out what had gone wrong with the mission.
Okay. And how were you getting the information? You're all the way in Florida.
Through your headset.
Okay. Now, was this coming in essentially live? I mean, were they radioing back from the mission, or was this coming in later and being recorded?
This was actually coming from the area right there.
Okay.
They were explaining it to you because they couldn't do it from an off site.
Mm-hmm.
It had to be there, and it was of course typewritten for them. They read it to us, and then we just had to follow the directions.
Okay. So, but you're getting reports sent over. Now, were these missions being flown over Europe that you were looking at? Or,
Yes.
Okay. And were these mostly the bombing missions, or were they?
Yes, mostly the bombing missions.
Okay. And as a plotter, I mean, what kind of information were you actually getting? What were they? What kinds of things would they tell you? Just where they were, or
They gave the flight, well, the ID of the plane,
Mm-hmm.
the speed that it was traveling, and I really can't remember. I know there was 3 things on the stand, and of course the 3 things they told us was on the map,
Mm-hmm.
and that's where we had to put the stand.
Right.
Okay.
Okay. So you've got a sort of a stand for each of these different air units that you're tracking, and then you
Right.
can move those.
There'd be maybe 2 or 3 on one side of the board and 2 or
Mm-hmm.
3 on the other side.
Okay. But if there was something in particular they had to report, if something went wrong, was that information that you got, or that someone else got that?
No.
You were just following where they
That's
were
right.
and
That's
what
right.
the courses were. Okay. And how many of you would be working on this at a time?
As I say, those were the people working on the board. We had other people that helped us.
Right.
If we had a raid stand that needed to be fixed or something, they would take care of it for us. We never stopped doing the work
Okay.
because they would, fix whatever needed to be done.
Right. But how many plotters would work at once? Would just be one of you
If
doing
I
it?
remember correctly, I think there were 4 of us.
Okay. All right. And did you learn, I guess, more about what was happening in these missions in one way or another? Would you ever try to figure out
Not really.
how stuff
Not
together?
really.
Okay.
You did the thing by rote, and when it was over, it was over.
Okay. Were there times when some of the officers or the people who were looking at the stuff seemed to be worried or concerned, or they don't give that away?
We never could look at them. All we were looking at was that board.
So they're up there looking down, and you're
Right, right.
Okay. And was this something where you were constantly having to move things to respond to new information?
We had a stick,
Okay.
a hook on it or whatever, and we had to move all the raid stands when we got the information.
Okay.
We moved the raid stand.
So this is really kind of coming in real time, keeping track of it while it's happening.
Right.
Okay. I think a lot of people wouldn't even know they did stuff like that, and especially not, you'd think maybe they would do that over in England, but you're all the way back in Florida.
Oh.
So
okay.
that's another piece of how the system worked.
Vaguely in the back of my mind, it seems to me that even after I got out during the Cold War, they had something like that in Grand Rapids here. I never got to see it. I was only with the Ground Observer Corps.
Mm-hmm.
But I reported to them what I had seen verbally,
Right.
and that was about it. It was pretty much the same.
Okay. All right. Now, about how long did you do the plotting work?
Oh gosh. I think it was a year, year and a half.
Okay, so kind of, so I guess toward late in the war, they didn't have so many bombing missions to make, and they were getting into Germany and all that.
Later on, they had other equipment.
Mm-hmm.
We had these huge radar, which they took away the personal operation of this, and that's when I was re-upped or assigned to being a teletype operator.
Okay. Now tell me a little bit about what life was like at that base in Orlando. What kind of quarters did you have?
It was a good place to be. Hot in the summer though, really hot. We had a lot of freedom. We could leave the base whenever we wanted, but we always had to be back in the base at a certain time. We could go to the small towns around. Sometimes could go up to D-Land and visit the naval and what they were doing. It was, you made friends with just a small group that where your bunks all sort of hung together. It was a good life.
Okay. Now, did you have women for your NCOs or your officers? Or?
Yes. One was a colonel, and I think one was a lieutenant. We had two.
Okay. All right.
Lieutenant Adamo, I remember that name.
All right. And then when you were actually doing work on the base, were you mostly getting orders from male officers or?
No.
Okay. So you had women who specialized in your work.
Yes, but we had to answer to male officers that were on the base. And it was a very large base. They had, huge link trainers and all of that sort of thing there.
All right. Now, how much socialization was there between the men and the women on a base like that? Would they let you date each other?
We fortunately were on a base that had a small lake.
Mm-hmm.
We had a beer garden by the lake. We could go swimming. And of course, combined, our area was blocked off.
Mm-hmm.
When we went to the beer garden, we could sit with the guys and have a beer and that sort of thing. Or we could meet we had a social house where you could meet for different things. I don't know whether there was a lot of social. I became involved with special services. It was a special assignment from my officer.
Mm-hmm.
We went out into all the different areas for war bond drives, and so there was a group that were men and women, that we went out and entertained and sold war bonds.
Okay.
Also, I worked with a theater group there, which, I mean, I made a lot of friends and a lot of things, and it was just ordinary life.
Okay. Now, when you were going out and you were selling war bonds, was that just right around Orlando, or did you travel more?
We had to travel.
Okay, so where would you go?
Oh gosh, the little towns around Orlando.
Okay.
I can remember D-Land. I can't remember any of the others. We'd sometimes go to bivouac areas and entertain the guys who were in bivouac.
Mm-hmm.
Other than that,
Okay.
life was good.
Sure. Okay. Now, what was when you were entertaining troops? Were you singing or playing music?
I was a singer.
Okay. Singer, and you also could do theater and act too?
Yes.
Yeah? Okay. All right. Now, had you done that kind of thing in high school or earlier?
No,
Okay. So how did you wind up doing it here?
I went. Yes, I established a small trooping children's group. We traveled to all the different elementary schools. We finally got all of our own equipment and everything. I think I had 6 or 7 friends that we all joined together, and it was just part of doing things.
Okay. Right. Now, you're doing that sort of. Are there other during the? Okay. At a certain point, your military career kind of got interrupted.
Repeat that, please.
Well, you had to leave the service for a while,
No.
or
When I was in special services.
or
what?
just while you were in the army. I mean, there was a point there you went out and you went back in again.
Oh, that's when they became the Women's Army Auxiliary Corps
Right.
became the Women's Army.
Right.
And yes, we had to re-up.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, it was quite a fabulous thing. All the WACs, we had to march out on the field, and the officers, I don't remember who the officer was. Anyway, he was from Washington, and we all re-signed up to stay in.
Okay. Now, but then so you worked as a plotter for a certain amount of time, and then you took on these extra jobs and extra duties. Now, were you still a plotter when you were also doing the singing and the acting, or you do that later?
When I was no longer a plotter, it was gone.
Okay.
And as I say, I worked with the entertainment groups, but that was, and there was some entertainment I did because we had a beautiful theater, and there were lots of things that we did in the theater, along with my job. It was just the camaraderie.
Right. Okay. Now, eventually, then you become a teletype operator.
Yes.
Okay. So, roughly when did that happen? Was the war still going on at the time?
No, it was just your job. You know,
Yeah.
you just we did. The only bad thing was we were on three. There were 3 different shifts, and so we were on 3 weeks, and then we had to go on the mid 6 to midnight or something, or anyway, there were 3 shifts, and you changed, and so lots of times because we had inspections every Saturday, and you could be caught in bed because you've been on a late shift. It was different.
Okay. Well, I guess I was asking when you changed from being, when did the plotter job end?
Yeah, right.
When did that happen?
I have absolutely no idea.
Okay.
It just ended.
Okay. But were you doing teletype work while the war was still going on?
Oh yes.
Okay. So it's before
Oh yes,
middle of
I
45.
was still in teletype. In fact, even when the war ended, we were frozen to our jobs because we had to run papers for the guys who were getting out of service. So yes, I was held to my job for I think another 6 months.
Okay. Now, what did the teletype operators do? What was your actual job physically?
The teletype missions, the teletype messages would come in code, and we would take them in code and pass them into the room where all the messages were decoded, and we never knew what they were. When we had to operate the teletype machine, it was a message that had to go to Tampa, and from Tampa it went direct to Washington, D.C. The teletype was never anything that any personal or anything that would be affect the war or anything like that. And I never knew what they were. Yeah, you were never told.
Did you need any special training to be a teletype operator?
No, because I had taken typing when I
Okay.
was in. Yes.
Okay, so if you can type, you can do
Right,
teletype.
right.
All right.
It's even on my discharge.
All right. Now, you say you stayed in. Now, did the atmosphere on the base change at all after the war ended? Did the attitudes of the men going through, was that different, or did it all stay the same? You're still on the base, the war has ended, and you're still working, but...
You're still doing the same thing.
Okay.
And actually, it took to an act of whatever to release us, because it had gotten to the point where most of us felt that there wasn't a need for us anymore. And so we had to approach the commanding officer and get across what we thought, and so that's the only way we got discharged at that time.
Okay. Now, did you want to get discharged?
Pardon?
Did you want to get discharged?
Yes. I felt that my job was done.
Okay. And then when did you get discharged?
Oh, gee.
Was that about 6 months after the war ended, or?
All I can remember, it was in December.
Okay. So maybe 45.
Yeah.
Okay. But you wound up in the Army for a while after that.
I re-signed up in the Reserve Army
Okay.
because we had a quite large reserve count here in Grand Rapids. But I had become pregnant, and because wasn't it Korea? I think it was Korea. Anyway, a woman could not have a child while she was still in service.
Okay. And so that's 1950 was when you actually left the service
right,
then,
right.
at that point. Okay. Now, when you were in the reserves, did you have regular meetings or
Yes.
training? Okay.
Yes.
So what were you doing then?
I can't remember.
Well, I mean, was it like just go someplace for a weekend or 2
Well,
weeks in the
no,
summer? Or?
we had meetings with an officer, and basically the meetings where you were learning a lot about what's going on and what's expected of you, what you could do to help, all of that.
Okay. But at that point, you're back living in Grand Rapids again? And,
Yes.
And work, okay. And,
Right.
and did you have a regular job then too?
No, I wasn't working at that time.
Okay. All right. And then so you had to leave, I guess, no, with the reserve unit, were there a lot of women in it, or was it mostly men?
It was mostly men. There were only a few women.
Okay. And how did the men treat the women?
I don't know. You know, I never felt anything was any different.
Okay.
We were just there
Mm-hmm.
because we felt patriotic to the
Right.
country and what we could do.
So they basically accepted you and
Right,
this.
right.
Okay. Because different people have different expectations for that
Yeah.
kind of thing. They think things might
Yeah.
happen. Yeah.
The only time I ever felt that men really didn't accept women was when I was the auxiliary in Orlando, Florida.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes when you went into town, they had a special area where service could go,
Mm-hmm.
and you might get slur remarks, just, you know, like men can talk about women. It just fell off my back, you know. I'm here because I want to be here.
Okay. And then you felt you got taken more seriously once you're the regular Women's Army Corps?
Would you repeat that,
Yeah.
please?
Did they take you more seriously after you went into
Yes.
the Okay.
I think so. Especially when we were, where we were stationed. The people of Orlando didn't accept. That was kind of tough. They weren't friendly at all. You were a uniform. But basically a lot of it was due to the women who had been there,
Mm-hmm.
who didn't conduct themselves very well.
Okay.
And so they left a stigma when they left. And we just learned to live with it.
Okay. Now, you're living, I mean, down in the South. Did you notice sort of the segregation in the civilian society, or?
Our segregation was segregating the black.
Yeah. But did you observe that?
Oh yes,
Okay.
strongly.
Now, had you been expecting that when you went down? Or?
No.
Okay.
No, because that didn't happen here at home.
Mm-hmm.
I had to deliver a message when we were doing a show or something. I had to deliver a message to one of the big buildings, whatever was going on, where the air links were, and a young man kept bowing to me and applauding me, and I felt bad, you know, because I was just another person,
Mm-hmm.
really, and I felt that every once in a while in the South.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Now, how much of a town was there in Orlando? I mean, today Orlando is this huge place.
It was a dot compared to what it is today.
Yeah.
But there were a lot of things we could go to. They held dances and different things. They had nice restaurants where we could go for an evening to get away from things. It was a small town.
Mm-hmm.
I think it had 4 or 5 lakes.
Okay. Now, when you think back to the time that you spent there, is there anything else that stands out in your memory? Particular things that happened?
Not really,
Okay.
you know. It's all there. I don't think about it. I think it was one of the good times of my life. I would want to do it again. But it was worth it.
Okay. What do you think you took out of the experience? Did you learn something from it or change it all?
I think I learned a lot more, to be more tolerant, to be more acceptable of people, which I didn't find up here. I was a small town girl,
Mm-hmm.
and I learned to expand and become sociable. I mean, I could stand there and taking a bus, and a lady had a cute baby. I started talking, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, you're really a nice person." And you know, you learn that people can change their attitudes. If you change your attitude,
Mm-hmm.
they'll change theirs. And so therefore I learned to accept a lot of things.
Okay. And then after you're out of the service, what kind of career or life did you go into?
When I got out of the service, my brother had come home.
Mm-hmm.
And so we did a lot of things together. We did a lot of Christmas shopping and just getting real acquainted to being with the family, and that's about all. I didn't look for a job right away. But eventually I found work here in Grand Rapids.
Okay, and what kind of work did you do?
Oh gosh, what did I do? You know, I don't think I can really remember. I can remember more recent years, different things that I did, but I think for a while I just didn't do anything.
Okay. All right. And I think that kind of gets us down here about to the end. So I'd like to thank you for taking the time to talk to me today.
Well, I'm glad to help.